All right. So we're going to move on to the grant management spreadsheet. Can everybody see the spreadsheet that I just pulled up? Amber?
Yep, Larry. You see
Yeah.
it.
Okay, perfect. So if you look down at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I'm going to just go through the various pages that are here. We have pre-project expenses, we have materials, we have equipment rental, volunteer labor, RTP billing, GIA billing, and summary. Okay. And I'm going to go through each of these sheets individually. So the first sheet is pre-project expenses. And these are expenses that are not reimbursable through the grant programs. And so an example of this is structural engineering. That bridge that's behind me and you know, when I have my, when I first came on, that was a 90-foot bridge, and we had to do the engineering for that bridge ahead of time. Cost a few $1,000s. And the reason is that we didn't know what size steel we needed. We didn't have any idea what we needed for abutments. So basically, we had to get an engineer involved to lay out the size of the project before I could even think about applying for a grant. So structural engineering is something the club may have to pay for in advance. For that same bridge, we had to do an archaeological study because they thought there might be Indian artifacts in the area. If you're doing any kind of work in wetlands where you have to do a wetlands permit, you may have to hire a wetland scientist. And then DES has a dredge and fill permit if you're going to work in wetlands. We talked about that briefly last week. But they have a permit fee. And in this case, it was about $1,200 for the permit fee. Again, I had to file it ahead of time because if I didn't get the permit, I couldn't get the grant. And then another common expense is logging and chipping. A lot of times we'll do the logging for a new trail in the winter time, the winter ahead of the project. And the reason for that is that there are restrictions on when you can cut trees in certain areas due to bats, bat habitat. So in order not to run into that, we usually bite the bullet and, you know, pay a logger to come in and cut and chip our trail, you know, ahead of time. So these are all things, and we like to keep track of this. Sometimes we can apply for a CEDC grant to help defray some of these expenses, but and these expenses cannot be used as matches on the grants. It's kind of like a nice to know thing for the Trails Bureau that we got money into the project ahead of time, but we really don't get any credit for it in the grant process. So the next sheet is materials. Now, what I've done with this is break it up into sections. Okay. So we've got beams and decking, we've got runners and abutment boards, railings, fasteners, abutment blocks, steel beams and bracing, trail gates, culverts, gravel and stone, asphalt, trees, and seed and hay. Now, one of the reasons I put this spreadsheet together is so I wouldn't forget about some of this stuff. As you can see, there's a lot of things to think about when you're doing one of these projects. And it's, you know, if you don't have it staring you in the face, sometimes you can forget. And before you know it, you got this major expense and you forgot to put it in your grant. So this sheet serves two purposes. It's a reminder on what you should be looking at for your project, number one, but number two, it allows you to put these expenses in and then it rolls it up automatically for you in the summary sheet. And I'll show that later on. So in my case, I did not have a lot of materials on this grant. I had a culvert, and I'll highlight this here. So I had this 24-inch by 20-foot culvert. If you remember, we were replacing a failed culvert. And one of the things you need to watch out for when you're using federal grant money is that it's got to be made in the USA. So this culvert, if I had ordered a Canadian culvert, price would probably be around $400. Instead, I'm paying $670 because it's comes with paperwork that says it's made in the USA. But this is a company called ADS, and that's where we get our USA culverts. Again, it comes through the local lumberyard. The other thing I'm getting for this is clay gravel. So I've got 71 loads of clay gravel at $340 a load, and it's 14-yard loads. Now, I'm going to take 340 and I'm going to divide it by 14 yards. 14 yards. And that's going to come up with a price of $24.28 per yard. Why is that important? Because when you go to fill in your grant paperwork, they like to know how much is it per yard. For management purposes, I like to deal in loads. It's just easier to think about, loads being delivered. But at some point, you're going to have to convert this to yards. So I'm just giving you a heads up when you go to do your grant paperwork, you're going to have to put yards in and not loads. And you see I've got different, in this case, I'm only using clay gravel, but I have listed here crushed gravel, 1.5 minus gravel, and then 6-inch crushed stone. And then, if you have multiples of these, it'll just total them up, under gravel and stone heading. So if you're doing bridges, you've got a whole bunch of different lumber here. These are the prices from last year. Obviously, you're going to have to update this with this year's prices. This stuff changes a lot, over the course of a year now. It used to be stable. It isn't anymore. And I've separated out my runners and abutment boards. Abutment boards are what you use if you have a steel beams, like for instance, set on top of concrete blocks. There's holes between the beams, and if you have a dirt ramp leading up to that bridge, you've got to put boards across the front of those steel beams to block the gravel from falling in under the bridge. So that's what I call abutment boards. Runners are boards that you put on top of the bridge. They're wear items that you can replace, if they get worn out. Railings, usually 2x6s, usually 4x6 posts. Fasteners, we got carriage bolts, we got timber lags, which are handy, nails for a nail gun. And again, you can add your own into these. You can insert lines and add your own. This is just kind of giving you some basics. Abutment blocks, I've got all different sizes here, 1x2, 2x2, 2x2 by 4s, 2x2 by 8s, and so on. Steel beams, this is going to be all over the place depending on what you're ordering, but I put an example in here of some pretty heavy duty steel beams. And then steel rods, steel rebar, and also angle iron and steel rods. We use 1-inch steel rods to hold our cement blocks in place. If they're on top of a bank and they could fall in to the river, we'll pound in some steel rods to hold them in place. And then trail gates, Again, if you want to get reimbursed under a federal grant for trail gates, you need to use USA Steel. And the only place I could find that sells them is a company in Utah. So I order them, pay 3 times as much as I would normally pay from Tractor Supply, and but you know I can get reimbursed for them. 4 by 6 by 12-foot posts for your gates. You don't want to forget about those. Culverts, all different sizes. Flare ends for culverts. If you're working with near a roadway, DOT requires that you put a flare end on each end of your culvert. The flare end basically takes the water flow and spreads it out. So it's round, and then it comes out to like a flat plane at the at the end of the flare. Asphalt, if you're crossing any state roads, you need to have an asphalt apron at the end of your trail. And so this is reimbursable, and you got to have an item in your grant for it. Trees, I use trees for screening in certain cases. If we're running a trail close by to somebody's house, we will put in, evergreen trees for screening. And then finally, seed and hay, very important that you put in for this so that it meets the rules, the DES rules. So always buy grass seed for seeding your ditch lines. If you're doing a snowmobile trail, you're going to want to seed the trail itself. Hay bales for your ditch lines. Grade stakes if you're going to use wattles. Straw wattles are basically 25 feet long, 9-inch in diameter. They're made out of straw, and they're kind of look like a big snake. They're very handy if you're putting in culverts and you need to kind of work your way around the from the culvert, up to the trail and back down to the culvert again. It's a lot easier to use these straw wattles than it is to use hay bales. And geotextile fabric, very handy if you have kind of a mucky area on your trail and you need to stiffen it up. You can buy a roll of this 12-foot wide geotextile fabric, roll it out, put dirt on top of it, with 8 inches of dirt on top of it, it'll hold a dump truck. So in this case, if you look at the materials that I bought, it's all at the bottom here. $670 worth of culverts, $24,000 worth of clay gravel. Oh, I don't have any trees. Got to take that out. That should be a 0. No trees for this job. And we've got grass seed and hay bales. So there's my total. Okay. Now we're going to move on to equipment rental. So very similar. I've got the different categories of equipment rental that we use. Brush cutter with operator, excavator with operator, dozer with operator, vibrating roller with operator, track dump truck with operator, grader with operator. So in this case, I'm using an excavator, I'm using a dozer, and a vibrating roller. And I've got my quantity of hours, which we calculated in our first lesson. And I've got my rate per hour, and then that gives me my totals. So there's my total equipment rental in orange there. Okay. Any questions on materials and equipment rental before I move on? Okay. Next is volunteer labor. So first thing up at the top here, you're going to see this unskilled labor rate per hour. And if you notice, I've got 2023 rate. this rate changes usually every year. So one of the first things you're going to want to do when you get your 2024 RTP application is to update this to the 2024 rate. I haven't actually checked to see what it is, but you know, I need to update this. So this is the amount of money that you get credited per hour, per volunteer hour. You don't get paid this money. It's just kind of a bookkeeping item. And at the end of the day, you can apply your volunteer time towards the match of your grant. So in this case, in the orange down at the bottom here, I'm projecting that we're going to have $519 worth of club match. So that comes from 18 hours times 2884, gives me my 519.12. And that can go towards my 20% match for my federal grant. Everybody understand that?
Yeah, Larry, quick question for you. As far as keeping track of that, is that just as simple as doing a logbook or something?
So I'm going to be showing you that there is a piece of paper that they want you to fill out. So generally what happens is on my RTP projects is I bring a notepad with me and I ask everybody who shows up to just sign their name onto that notepad. And then what I'll do is I'll fill in the number of hours we were there that day. And then I'll come back to my office and I'll transcribe those names and the hours onto this form that the Trails Bureau gives us. And we will be going over that form in a future lesson. But yeah, that's a good question. Does that answer it?
Sure does. Thank you, Larry.
Okay, great. All right. So what I did here was I've got these different categories of tasks, and these I've kind of built up over time of common things that you're going to want to think about when you're planning your grant. So let's run through these because I think it's important that you hear it and understand what it is. So first one here is transport 50-pound bags of grass seed to trail location. So what this means is I'm going to a store in Colebrook to buy this conservation mix. So for me, that's about an hour ride each way. And I'm bringing the grass seed back out to the trail. So in this case, I didn't even count my hours to go pick up the grass seed, but I could have. This is just bringing the grass seed out to the trail location. Spreading the grass seed along the ditch lines of my trail. Generally, the way I do that is I have somebody drive an ATV, drive me out in a side-by-side ATV with the grass seed in the back, and then I use a spreader and pour some of the bag into the spreader. I walk the ditch line, and the ATV follows along. When I need grass, go back up the ATV and refill. So that's where I get two people, and it's 2 hours per bag. In this case, I've got one bag that I'm spreading. Transport hay bales to trail. So in this case, we got two people picking up the hay bales at a local farm, throwing them on a trailer, bringing them out and throwing them out in the ditch lines on the trail. I'm sorry, I broke it up. Transport 25 hay bales to trail location was picking it up from the farm, and then installing the hay bales is another line item. Same thing for farm gate, picking up the farm gate, transporting it to the trail. I don't happen to have a farm gate here, but my farm gates go to Maine. I have to go drive 2 hours to Maine to pick them up because that's the closest dealer for that place in Utah that bills them. So, if I'm doing a farm gate, I'll fill in the number of hours it took me to go pick up the farm gate. assist excavator operator in installing the farm gate. So I usually use 12-foot poles, and the excavator will dig them down 5 feet. We'll have 7 feet sticking out of the ground. So usually, I'm steadying the pole, leveling the pole while he throws the dirt back in around it. So usually I allow an hour for installing a gate. Culverts, in this case, I have to pick up culverts and transport it out to the trail. Because it's a 24-inch culvert, 20 feet long, no way I'm picking that up myself. That thing weighs probably 120 pounds. So I need 2 people, one on each end, get it on the trailer, get it out to the trail, and then we're gonna, I'm going to throw it into the ditch and help the operator line it up. Picking up straw wattles. Again, I get my wattles up in Colebrook. So if I got to go pick up a pile of them, I'll put my time for going to pick them up and then getting them out to the trails. And then usually what I do is take 4-foot grade stakes, cut them into 2-foot lengths, and then use those to pin the wattles in place. So I have time to go pick up the wattles, time to cut the grade stakes, and then time to install the wattles. Pick up bridge decking and runners. So a lot of times we can't get the lumber truck out to our trail locations. So we got to go pick the lumber up at the lumber yard, pile it on a trailer and bring it out. So we want to get reimbursed for that time. And so in this case, I picked up the decking and runners and then transporting it to the bridge site. Usually that involves transferring it to a smaller trailer to get it out there. If you have an existing bridge deck that's rotted and you got to remove it, you need time in there for that. And then you got to bring that old bridge deck to the recycling center. So we got time in there for that. If you're building a new bridge, you're going to be installing cement abutment blocks, and you're going to need to have an excavator operator putting those in place, but he needs guidance on placement of the blocks, so we need time for that. And then the same thing for steel beams. Excavator will be picking them up, but you're going to be placing them where they need to be. Then you got to install wood stringers on top of the steel beams, install your bridge decking into the stringers, install runners on top of the deck. And then, this is a miscellaneous where I had to move a gate. So I put that in there as well for another project. So again, this is one of those lists that if there's something that you're doing and it's not on this list, then all you need to do is click on a line, right click, insert, and you can then put in a new category in here. Okay. Any questions on volunteer labor?
Larry, is all of the work that's basically the handwork of helping with the culverts and everything, is that all strictly volunteer hours? Like if the excavator has a laborer with him that's hired, is that something that it gets paid for if it's hired labor?
No.
Okay.
So, that's up to the excavator operator. If he wants to have a high enough rate that it includes a helper, that's his deal. But, as far as the state is concerned, you're hiring an excavator with an operator, one operator, not an operator and a helper.
Okay.
So generally what we do is we get people to volunteer to come in and help our excavator operators with this kind of stuff.
Okay.
So, and then we track it all through the forms that I'll be showing you later. Any other questions on volunteer labor? Okay, moving along. So this next sheet is what's called the RTP billing tracker sheet. And essentially what this is it's a space that you can use to put in every time you pay an invoice. And it's really important that the check amount that you make your checks out for matches what's on the invoice. Otherwise, it's going to raise red flags. So in this case, I'm putting in the invoice number, the vendor, in this case, ABC Excavating. He was doing excavation work. I'll just put $1,000 in here just for now, just to put something in there. I have a column that says the invoice was sent to the treasurer on 6/30/2023. The canceled check came back to our bank account 7/15/23. It was check number 154. And I sent that to the Bureau of Trails to get reimbursed on 7/25/23. And then I confirmed that we got the electronic payment from the Trails Bureau on 8/10/23. Okay. Now this all seems like a lot of extra work for every invoice. But let me tell you, if I showed you one of my grants and I got 40 items here, it's really easy to lose track of getting reimbursed for an item. And it's happens to me many times. So, if you want to make sure that you're getting paid everything you're supposed to be getting paid, you need to track it. And this is one way to do it. I'll show you where this shows up in the summary sheet later on. But the other thing that this is extremely handy for is when you go to file your reimbursement paperwork, it's going to ask you for invoice number. It's going to ask you for check number. It's going to ask you for the amount. So what's nice is I use this as kind of my master sheet, and then I fill out the paperwork that I'm sending to the Trails Bureau off of this master sheet. So it just makes it really easy to go to one place and know all my numbers are there. As a little aside, my treasurer has given me access to our electronic bank account, not to take money out, but to go on and check for canceled checks. So she's given me her login password information so that I can go in on a daily basis and look for when this check 154 clears. I can now go in and I can print out a copy of that canceled check. And they need both sides of the check. So they need the front side of the check and the back side of the check. So what generally I do is I print both of those out, put them into a PDF file, and then I've got it available to send to the Trails Bureau. So that's just a quick overview. Anybody have any questions on the RTP billing tracker? Okay. Moving along to the GIA billing tracker. This is basically the exact same thing. Invoice number, vendor, description of what we did with the money, amount of money. I'll put 500 in here for now. Again, sent to the treasurer. I got my canceled check back on this date. Check number. I sent it to the BOT for reimbursement. They got back to me on this date with a payment, and then I usually put in the payment amount as well once it comes in. So I put that in there. And then one more column. You also need to send this to the Trails Bureau as a match for your RTP grant. So remember, we're using gravel in my grant as a match for the RTP grant. So GIA is being used as a match for RTP. So again, this is another reminder to me, I got to do this step. If I didn't have this column here, I might forget. Any questions on the GIA billing tracker? Okay. Now we come to the fun part, the summary sheet. So this is where it all comes together. So you remember all of these titles that we had in the materials sheet. So these are getting pulled actually from the materials sheet. So if I were to go back to the materials sheet and let's say change this from runners and abutment boards to just runners. And now I come back to my summary. Okay. Hey, that's supposed to change. Wonder why it didn't. Huh. What do you know? I might have found a bug in my spreadsheet. I'm gonna have to check into that. This should have pulled the new thing runners. It should have just said runners here. I'll have to look into that. At any rate, it's pulling these subcategories of materials from the first sheet. It's pulling the amounts from the first sheet. So all this total matches the total on the materials sheet. 25,125. Okay. And the same thing is happening on the equipment rental. Okay. These totals are being pulled over from the equipment rental sheet. So what that allows you to do is you can now allocate these to these columns. So I'm allocating $15,980 of my gravel to RTP, and that's going to leave a balance of 8160 from this total of 24,160. So, you know, when I enter this number here, I entered 10,000. You'll see that the balance shows up in the GIA column. So while I'm doing this, what's happening down here is it's calculating some really useful information. You remember that your RTP project, your RTP funds can only fund 80% of your total. So in this case, my total project size is 45,690.12. If you take a look at my RTP requested, this is showing me that I've got 78%. As long as this number doesn't go over 80, I'm good to go. And then this is the remainder of the project is allocated to GIA. There's also some club contributions. I'll talk about that in a minute. And so basically you can use this spreadsheet and you can just kind of allocate stuff and figure out when you're approaching this 80% by just continuing to allocate until you get there. So in this case, what I did to get to this 15,980 is I used the $340 per load. So 15,980 divide by 340. So this is this represents 47 loads of gravel. So I want to do everything on a round number basis. In other words, I don't want this to be 47.5 loads of gravel because the trucker is charging me per load. And so I want my RTP to fall on a per load boundary. I want my GIA to fall on a per load boundary. In this case, because gravel is reimbursed at 100% of GIA, what I'm doing in this case is I'm allocating as much as I can to gravel and stone. I started out just allocating my equipment rental. So my equipment rental costs totaled up to be $20,020. Okay. And so I knew that I could get close to $36,000 in reimbursement out of this grant. So I added basically another 16,000 in gravel cost. And that pushed me up to 36,000, which is 78.79% of my total project size. Okay, and the remainder I put in RTP with one exception. And that was this $26 for the club. And why did I do that? Oh, I know why I did that. Okay. So the reason that I did that because at the time, let's see, $6. I believe at the time I was very close to this 80%. And because I had the trees in there as a mistake, it made it a little different. So I had put $26 in the club bucket to essentially stay under the 80%. So these are little tricks you can play with your, with your allocation in order to, to get it to come in under under the budget. I'm probably going to put that $26 back in here now that I have the extra room to do it. Okay. The other thing that's in here is you can see that I've got information from those two sheets, the RTP billing tracker and the GIA billing tracker. You can see that I've billed 1,000. I haven't gotten any payments yet for RTP. In this case, I billed 500 to GIA and I got reimbursed 500. So it's just kind of a cool way to, keep track of how much is left on your grant that's remaining that you got to get reimbursed from the Trails Bureau. It's just a nice place to go to just kind of see a summary of what's going on. And then finally, I've got total project size with pre-project expenses. Again, don't really use this for anything except reporting to my board on, what the total project size was, because you can't really use pre-project expenses anywhere. So, does anybody have any questions on the summary sheet? Wow, that's a surprise. But I'd have at least a few questions on this one.
Larry, you're a spreadsheet wizard. That's perfect. That's makes it so simple, makes it nice.
I appreciate that. This has probably been 10 or 12 years in development to get to this point. So, I keep, making it better every year. So, I think it's going to help you guys a lot. I really do. I think if you start out and just go from the left to the right, put your materials in, put your equipment rental in, which you've learned how to do through the, through the estimation process. Volunteer labor, take a guess at this. You won't need your RTP billing. I'm gonna actually take those numbers out now. But you won't need this until later. But I guarantee you, you're gonna be happy you've got this. And then at the end of it, you come here and you start allocating and figure out how you get to your 80%. And you always start with your equipment rental because GIA grants will only pay 80% of that cost. So RTP, you can get 100% of that reimbursed and then match it with materials because our GIA pays 100% of materials. So I always get my equipment rental under RTP, and then I push as many materials in as I can till I reach my 80%, and then the rest I go to GIA. And I can tell you, by doing this, it helps the Trails Bureau because it saves the GIA funds. It's preserving GIA funds for other clubs and other uses. So they really, really like it when you do this. They look very favorably on your grant when you do this. So basically try and max up, try and get to 80% if you can or close to it. And then, the other thing that they like is round numbers. Okay, so if you notice, my RTP grant is $36,000. You don't want to get into 36,100, 36,500. I think that would fly, but they really, really like round numbers. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding how much is going to be RTP versus GIA. Try and keep it to a round number. Okay. Anything else? All
Larry, I
right.
have a
Yep, go
question
ahead.
about the equipment rental portion
Yeah.
of it.
Yes.
You have to get multiple quotes from different companies as far as the excavators.
Very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that. So yes, there is rules on how much if you go over 10,000 in equipment rental costs, then you need to get 3 bids and you need to go with the lowest bid. If you are doing materials, as long as you only bill $2,000, well, not 2,000, less than $2,000 per invoice per day, then you don't need to go for a bid. So as an example, on the gravel, my clay gravel, what I do with that is it's $340 a load. So taking 2,000 divided by 340, and it's 5.8 loads. So basically, I can only have them bill up to 5 loads per day on an invoice. So my clay gravel, 5 times 340 is equal to 1,700. So I'm going to be working with my clay gravel guy, and I'm going to say, okay, on Monday, you delivered 5 loads. So there's $1,700. On Tuesday, you delivered 5 loads. There's $1,700. And I'm going to keep doing that until we run out of money that I owe them. And when I get down to the end, maybe it's 2 loads that I'm delivering. Now, remember I told you that you have to bill it in yards. So I'm figuring in loads, but when I actually have the invoices made out, it's going to say X number of yards at X dollars per yard. because it's got to match the paperwork in the GIA and RTP. And we're kind of getting our head ourselves a little bit on this, but keep that in mind when it comes to gravel. They like it in yards. We can't bill it in loads. But I like to think in loads. It's a lot easier to think in loads and then translate to yards later. That makes sense to everybody. Do you understand what I mean about staying under $2,000 a day per invoice?
That makes it a lot easier.
Okay. Now, same thing with lumber. Okay. Again, I mean, I deal with my lumber yard. They give us very good prices, really good, availability. I'm not going to be, trying to go to 3 different places to get bids on lumber. So, I do the exact same thing with them. I have them usually quote me the entire job on one quote, but then when it goes to get billed out, we bill it out in pieces. Monday, we're billing out, let's say the decking. Okay. Tuesday, we're going to bill out the abutment boards and the runners. Wednesday, we're going to do the fastenings and culvert, And so I just have them spread it out over 3 invoices, 3 days. And then when I get those invoices, there's a separate check for each invoice. Okay. Drives my treasurer crazy. But, I just sit with her usually once a week, give her all the invoices. She does the checks up, boom, out they go. And generally what I do is I'll hand deliver the checks to the vendors and tell them, put it in the bank to tomorrow at the latest. Because the problem is I can't get this money back until they cash the check. And if they're sitting on it for 3 weeks, that does me absolutely no good. So usually once I get all the checks written out, I put them in envelopes and I hand carry them out to the lumberyard, to the gravel people, to the excavator people, and tell them, please deposit it so I can get my canceled check, so I can get my money back. And it saves a ton of time. Again, we're running projects that were $200,000 to $250,000, and our bank account was 20, and we borrowed 50 from Nova, so we had 70 grand to work with. It doesn't go very far if you got people sitting on checks. Okay.
Excuse me, Larry.
Yes.
So you said it was 2,000 on materials. What was the threshold on like equipment or like an operator and equipment?
10,000.
10,000.
Yes.
Okay, so if they were to do work, the way you would do it, instead of getting like 3 different quotes, if you like someone you were working with, is have them bill you, say, however many days equals 10,000, then have a few different invoices.
You could do that. The problem is when it goes over 10,000 total for the project, you've got to get the bids. So in this case, I've got 20,046, in subcontractor in equipment rental, So what I would do in this case is I would create a RFP request, or RFQ, which is a request for quote. And I'd say, we've got this project that we're working on. It's X amount of feet of trail. That summary form that you put together? Basically, you can give them a copy of that summary form, only don't put the pricing in there. Put in how many hours you think it's going to take based on those metrics. And you can give them a copy of the map. You can show them the elevation profile, and you can then say, come on out and take a look at it. And then I need a price for excavator with operator, dozer with operator, vibrating roller with operator. I need number of hours and rate per hour. And then you got to get 3 people to bid on it. And, and I'm fortunate in my area that I have 2 people that I know and trust. And, you know, they both bid against each other, and, you know, may the best man win. And then I've got a third contractor that I work with that will give me a bid that's higher than those two. And so, you know, usually what happens is after I get those bids, I get him to give me a higher bid, and there's my three. And he gets rewarded with gravel work, so he's not complaining. You know, he doesn't have a lot of this equipment, you know, that he can bring out to do trail work anyway. So part of my deal with him is, you know, if I need a quote to help me out, you help me out, and I'll help you out with some gravel work.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question.
Okay, good.
So on most of these, we're gonna all be over like that $10,000 threshold pretty easily.
Pretty easily, yeah, absolutely.
Larry,
No.
question for you.
Yep.
Does RTP reimburse trucking of material if it's a separate line item?
Tricky. The answer is yes. And I'll show you under equipment rental where we had that situation. So we had a situation where we had an extremely steep hill that the dump trucks couldn't climb up. So we had to have the dump trucks bring the material into a staging area, and then we had to transfer that using a front end loader into a track dump truck. So we had actually 16 yards of material because it was a logging road. In this case, we were able to do 16-yard loads. Came in, they dumped them in the staging area, and then there was a track dump truck that could take 10 yards. And so we had a front end loader with a 5-yard bucket on it, and that would, 2 scoops would fill that track dump truck. The track dump truck would bring it up to the steep hill, dump it. The dozer up there would spread it, and then that track dump truck comes back down, reloads, and goes back. So yes, we were able to do that on RTP grant. You know, when you do your project description, you know, and I'll show you this later on, you know, you're just going to have to explain, you know, what's going on and why you need that extra step. Very good
Well,
question.
Or I guess I meant more or less in the sense of trucking like the clay gravel in. Most gravel yards will typically break it down per yard, you know, say it's $275 for your triaxle, and then it's $50 for them for the delivery for the truck to drop it off at the location.
So what you need to do is you need to tell them that they have to quote the price per yard as delivered, not with the trucking separate. And they'll do that. You know, they usually can bill it either way. So, you know, most of these guys have a rate for, you know, per yard delivered. But the reason you want that is because you're buying material. And especially if it's on a GIA grant, okay? So let me explain the difference. If you include the trucking, if you include the delivery in the price of the gravel, then GIA will pay 100%. So because you're buying gravel at, let's say normally gravel's $15 a yard and it's $7 a yard to truck it. Okay. So if you put it on the invoice as $15 a yard for gravel and then $7 a yard for, you know, for delivery, and you go to get a GIA grant, they're going to give you 100% of the $15, and they're only going to give you 80% of the $7. Okay. Whereas if you combine them together and make it $22 a yard delivered, they're going to pay 100%. Does that make sense?
I know that that's been brought up with GIA, which is why I guess I just wanted to see how RTP looked at that and just kind of note on that.
Yeah. So RTP, you need to treat it the exact same way. It's considered materials, and just make sure that all trucking costs are included in that material cost. Same thing if you're getting, if the lumberyard charges for delivery, which mine doesn't, but if you're getting somebody to deliver something, you know, make sure that they don't have the delivery as a separate line item.
Larry, that's gonna be the same as with like the excavator or the dozer, equipment rental. Any delivery charge or fuel service charge is also gonna have to be built into their hourly rate, correct?
That is correct. Yes. You do not want to get into transporting charges. You know, I always tell my excavator operator, you're going to be paying for trucking, add it into your rate, because I can't pay for, you know, trucking of excavator. That's just not something they're going to pay for. You know, the club would have to pay for that. Any other questions? Okay. So your homework assignment is to fill out the grant management spreadsheet that's going to be used to manage your grant. So you've already done a lot of homework on your grants already. So it's just a matter of filling out the management spreadsheet, and you've already done equipment rental. You've already done some materials, but I want you to think about other materials that you know, that are now in this materials list. I want you to think about your volunteer labor and what you're going to put in for volunteer labor for your project. So really, you're going to take what you did as a base and add to it, and then fill in this spreadsheet, and then send me the spreadsheet so I can check it out. And I want you to try and get as close to 80% RTP as you can, using round numbers. So a little creative math there, but really not too bad. One other thing I'd like to mention, if you are planning on doing an RTP grant by June 16th, you need to attend one of two workshops. They're going to have a workshop. They're going to have actually two workshops in Concord on May 17th. One will be, I believe, in the morning and one in the evening. And then they're going to have one workshop in Lancaster. I believe it's in the evening. They're on the Trails Bureau website in the RTP section. But if you do not attend the RTP workshop, one of those three RTP workshops, then even if you put the grant in, they won't give it to you. You have to attend their workshop, period. So keep that in mind if you're planning on putting an RTP grant in this year. Mark that on your calendar, either of those dates, and make sure you attend one of those two sessions. I'm sorry I went over a little bit tonight. Is there any other questions?
Larry, your list of operators or else businesses that you use, are you going to leave a list for everybody to use of ones that you already use currently?
You mean equipment rental people?
Yes.
Well, that's really kind of local to us. You know, we've got people on here from below the notch.
Mhm.
So, you know, each area is going to have their own resources they're going to have
Right,
to tap into.
right.
So, I guess if somebody needs, you know, somebody up here in this area, I'll be happy to share who we use. No problem. You can just contact
Mhm.
me and I'll give you the info.
All right.
Larry, one last question. What is the turnaround time usually for the payout on the RTP grant?
I've had it be a week and I've had it be 6 weeks. It just depends on all kinds of stuff. It depends on how busy the people are who are processing the bills. It depends on how quickly the people enter the data into the system. Depends on how quickly they cut the checks. Actually, it's not checks. I urge you to sign up with direct deposit. So all our money shows up as direct deposits into our bank account directly from the Trails Bureau. And that saves quite a bit of time as well. But, you know, in the best case, it's a week, but that rarely happens. I would say it averages 3 weeks, 4 weeks, somewhere in that range.
Thank you.
Mhm. Anybody else?